Has someone ever tried to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself?
You know how some people have parents who, no matter how old they get, still treat them like the center of their world, the kind of parents who call every week, who plan holidays around their kids' schedules, who gush about them at every family gathering. Well, that was never my life, and I learned it pretty early on, though for years I pretended maybe I was just imagining it, maybe I was being overly sensitive, maybe I was reading too much into things. The truth, though, is that my parents have always been very good at making me feel like I was an afterthought, like I was some accessory that didn't really belong in their version of a family photo. And it has been happening for so long that I can go back through the years and stack moment after moment into a tower of proof. It started with the birthdays, the ones that were always too close to something else, or bad timing with your father's work trip. So instead of a party, I got a rushed dinner, or sometimes not even that. Meanwhile, my brother Daniel would have entire backyard productions with hired entertainment, themed cakes, and neighbors invited from 3 blocks over. I remember once when I was 12, I sat in my room listening to the noise outside, the rented bounce house squeaking while kids jumped, and my mom calling me downstairs to take a quick photo with Daniel before going back to cleaning up after his party. That was my role. Be available for the obligatory shot, smile like everything was fine, and then disappear back into the background. Holidays followed the same rhythm. Christmas morning was always centered around Daniel, who got whatever big-ticket item was popular that year, consoles, bikes, gadgets, while mine were the kind of gifts you give when you realize you can't show up empty-handed. They were practical things, like socks or cheap perfume, and while I tried to smile and thank them, I could see the difference in how they lit up at his excitement compared to the polite nods they gave me. I told myself back then that maybe money was tight, maybe they were just doing the best they could, but deep down I knew the truth. They could find the money, the time, the energy for him, just never for me. I carried that pattern into adulthood, still trying to make excuses, still trying to convince myself that if I just worked harder at the relationship, if I just showed up enough, called enough, or proved myself enough, maybe one day I would be treated like their daughter instead of an extra. But the excuses wore thin, especially when the same things kept happening over and over. Family vacations where I wasn't available, even though no one asked me for my schedule. Weddings where I was seated at the back table with people I barely knew while Daniel's friends and girlfriends sat front and center. Even when I graduated from college, they turned it into a side note because Daniel had just gotten a promotion at his first job, and apparently, that was more worth celebrating than the fact that I had spent 4 years working and studying just to prove I could do something on my own. So when I saw the photos this time, when I scrolled past the smiling faces on a deck with cocktails in hand, the caption reading, "Family time at last," I felt something different. It wasn't shock, because of course they had gone on a luxury cruise without telling me, just like they had done with smaller trips before, the difference being that this was on a scale too big to brush aside. It wasn't sadness either, because I think that part of me, the one that still wanted to be chosen, to be invited, had been slowly dying for years. What I felt was a quiet confirmation, like the last puzzle piece sliding into place, leaving no room for denial. They had money to spend, time to take off work, energy to plan, and space in their lives for Daniel and his girlfriend, but none of that included me. Not even a courtesy text, not even a mention in passing. And here's the strange part. I didn't cry. I didn't sit there scrolling through their photos with tears running down my face like I might have 5 years ago. Instead, I sat back, phone in hand, and thought, okay, you've made yourselves perfectly clear. It was like something inside me finally snapped, but not in an explosive way, more like a rope that had been fraying for years and finally gave out with a soft, almost relieving break. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the kid begging for attention or the adult making excuses for why my parents didn't think of me. I wasn't holding out hope that maybe next year they'd change, maybe next holiday I'd matter. No, this time, I let the weight of what they had done sink all the way in, and instead of trying to swim against it, I let it pull me somewhere new. That was the moment the plan started forming, not because I wanted to hurt them for fun, but because I realized they needed to see me not as the extra, not as the silent one who would always smile and swallow it, but as someone who could make a choice that cut just as deep as the choices they'd been making my whole life. It wasn't about payback in the way people think of revenge, with yelling or slamming doors or dramatic confrontations. It was quieter, sharper, the kind of move you don't see coming until it's too late. So when people ask me what pushed me over the edge, what moment made me finally stop playing along with their idea of family, I always think of that caption, "Family time at last." Because for me, that was the end. That was the proof. And that was the start of something they never thought I had in me. This time, I didn't break down. This time, I didn't ask why. This time, I started planning. After the moment when that caption about family time slammed into me like a door politely closed in my face yet again, I decided I would not repeat the old routine where I tried to fix what I never broke, so I went quiet on purpose. Not the kind of silence that begs to be noticed, but the kind that states a boundary without a speech. And while they were out at sea drinking, posting, and tagging people who were apparently more family than I have ever been, I turned my phone face down, turned off notifications from their contacts, and started building the kind of calm, methodical plan that grows out of years of being told next time, another time, not now. I opened my messages and scrolled back through years of texts that read like a tutorial on how to disappear your daughter without ever saying the words, and with each little dismissal I took a screenshot and dropped it into a folder I named receipts. Because if I was ever going to doubt my own memory again, I wanted proof in my face, so in went the birthday apologies that arrived after midnight, the last-minute cancellations for dinners I had already cooked for, the travel photos from trips I did not know existed, the comments about how Daniel really needed this one to be special because he had been so stressed, and the lines that always showed up like a brand stamp on my life. "We will do something next time." And as the folder grew, I felt something inside me settle, not in a bitter way but in a final way, because when the pattern is that obvious you stop arguing with it and you start acting accordingly. I pulled up my email and found the practical pieces that, funny enough, were all in my name, because being the afterthought never stopped them from leaning on me when it was useful. So there were the streaming accounts where I had added them years ago because it was easier than listening to them complain about ads. The shared cloud plan I had been paying because my storage was fine and theirs was constantly overflowing with albums of events I never attended, and the family calendar I had created just to keep track of who was supposed to be where even though they never used it to include me. And as I looked at each little digital tie, I could see exactly how many ways I had subsidized a version of family where I was a convenient utility rather than an actual person. I am not proud of how long it took me to understand that politeness can become self-harm when you are the only one practicing it, and maybe that is why this time I decided my first move would be quiet and clean rather than dramatic. So I unfollowed without announcement. I turned off location sharing that they never reciprocated anyway. I removed them from the household on the shopping account that had been mysteriously refilling their cart with items they never seemed to pay me back for, and I canceled the guest profiles on the streaming services, because if you can toast to family time without me, then you can tolerate a few commercials without me too. While they floated from port to port taking photos of themselves being a unit, I made a different kind of album on my phone, a simple grid that told a story with dates, captions, and the same 2 words repeated under new excuses, next time. And I will not pretend I did not feel a petty little spark of satisfaction when I thought about the moment they would try to upload the next round of smiling proof and run into a warning that said storage full, because the shared cloud plan they never paid for was done. I had moved my things off it, I had closed the family sharing that I opened in the first place, and I had clicked confirm on a screen that asked if I was sure I wanted to leave the group. Which made me laugh out loud because I had never been in the group to begin with, not in any way that mattered. It was not about punishing them for sport, it was about matching my actions to the reality they kept demonstrating, and that meant I no longer carried the bill for the version of family where I was both invisible and indispensable. So I wrote myself a note that I pinned at the top of my phone, a simple sentence that said, "Stop financing your own exclusion," and every time I felt a small sting of guilt I would read it and let the truth steady me, because guilt is sneaky when you have been trained to accept crumbs and say thank you. By the time the ship turned back toward home, the practical house cleaning was mostly done, and I could finally think about the message, not a paragraph, not a speech, not another attempt to explain how their choices landed on me. because explanations had never reached them when I tried before, so I chose something simpler and sharper. One single screenshot that said everything without needing my commentary. A screenshot of their own post. The one with the caption about family time and the four faces smiling into a camera I did not even know was there, which meant I could answer their "why were you not answering" with a mirror, and I saved it with a name I would remember, and I placed it where my thumb could find it fast. I had cut the noise. I had cut the tabs they left open in my life, and I had cut the bill, and while they would not feel the weight of that right away, they would feel it when it mattered to them, which was exactly the point. And as the last piece of this round, I pressed the button that ended our family sharing for good, watched the confirmation arrive, and let myself enjoy the small, clean click of a door finally shutting from my side, and with that done I looked at the screenshot waiting in my gallery and thought, now we wait, because the next move lands when they text that chirpy little question they always ask after doing something that hurt. Why were you so quiet? And then I send it. When the ship finally docked and the rhythm of their posts slowed down to those polite little updates people make when they are gathering their luggage and trying to look effortless after a week of nonstop attention, my phone lit up with the first text from my mother that pretended nothing unusual had happened. A chirpy line about how they were back and how the cruise had been exactly what they needed, and how she hoped I had been well and why had I been so quiet, which would have made me laugh if it did not trace the same groove we have been walking for years, where she plays innocent and I am supposed to soothe her confusion. So instead of replying, I let the screen go dark, and then, not 5 minutes later, my father chimed in with a practical opener about whether I had received a package he asked to be delivered to my address, because it was easier that way, which told me everything I needed to know about the hierarchy of their priorities, because even in the first moments after their return, the usefulness of me still came before the existence of me. I waited long enough to feel calm because I wanted this to land without any extra noise from me. Then I opened the thread, ignored the question about the package, scrolled back to the photo I had saved with the caption about family time, and I thought about how many times I had tried to explain feelings to people who refused to see actions, and how futile that had been. So I pressed the little arrow to attach the image, and I sent it with no text at all. Not even a period, since anything more than that would have offered them a doorway into debate or a chance to pretend they did not understand. And I watched the tiny status marks change as the message left my phone, passed through the quiet space between their world and mine, and arrived with a definitive ping in the very hands that had chosen to lift a camera and write those words without bothering to check if their daughter even knew they were leaving town. For a minute nothing happened, and I took that minute to let my shoulders drop and to breathe in the kind of relief you feel when you finally say the thing you know you needed to say, but in the cleanest possible way. And right when I thought maybe they would stay silent, my mother replied with a question mark followed by a line about how she did not understand, because confusion is her favorite way to keep me teaching her how to treat me. And I just watched the bubbles appear and disappear while my father typed, deleted, and started again. And when his message finally arrived, it was a full paragraph of justification about how the cruise had been last minute, how Daniel needed it, how they did not want to burden me with the details, and how they assumed I was busy, which carried the same stale scent of all their past explanations that somehow managed to center their comfort and my supposed independence, as if I had asked to be cut out so they would not be inconvenienced by making room for me. I did not reply because this was not a dialogue and it was not a classroom, it was a mirror, so I let the screenshot sit there and do what I could never do with words. And as the typing bubbles rolled across and stopped again, I made the move that felt exactly like the point of the exercise, which was forwarding that same image into the extended family group chat that they love when it suits their bragging, but avoid when the spotlight turns, again with no caption and no commentary, just their own boast floating in a place where the audience would understand precisely what was being shown and not said. And I muted the thread after the message sent so I would not be dragged into a storm of backpedaling, because this was not a performance for my uncles and cousins, it was a line in the sand that they could see from anywhere. My phone started to vibrate in short bursts as family members reacted, little hearts and exclamation points blooming next to the photo, followed by 2 careful messages from a cousin who has always known the score, asking if I was okay and if I needed anything, which made me feel seen in a way my parents never quite managed. And then my mother sent 3 texts directly to me within a span of a minute, all of them a mix of hurt and defensiveness about how public I had made this, how it was not fair to twist their words, and how I could have just called them if something bothered me. And I stared at those lines thinking about every time I did call and nothing changed. Every time I pulled them aside at gatherings and tried to give them a path to fix it, and they chose the path of least resistance, which always curved around me and back to Daniel. The urge to explain rose and then passed, because explanations have been my side of the story for too long, and they have never produced anything but more work for me, so I chose a response that was not really a response. I tapped the message with the question mark and reacted with a thumbs up, which was petty and perfect in equal measure, because it turned their own minimal effort back toward them, and it told them that I understood exactly what they were asking and that I had already answered. And while the screen filled up with their new attempts to rewrite the timeline, I set my phone down, walked to my desk, and printed the very picture I had sent them, because I wanted something physical to hold in my hands later when guilt tried to crawl back in and make me second-guess the clarity of this moment. And since I promised myself that each step would match the harm and not exceed it, I let the most satisfying and measured piece of revenge drop right then by going to the platform where they had posted the original photo, tapping into the comment field beneath their caption, and placing the same screenshot there as a reply with no words, no fight, no speech. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to people who deny reality is to reflect it back to them in front of the stage they chose, and once it posted I locked my account, turned off notifications for the rest of the day, and felt a calm settle in that I had not known I was capable of, because whether they chose to delete it or argue with it or pretend it was a misunderstanding, the message had already landed in the one place it mattered most, which was inside me, where for the first time I saw that I could end a conversation without a single sentence and still be heard. And as I closed the app, one thought: this was only the setup, because the real consequence was still coming, and it would not be something they could talk their way around. The morning after the screenshot did its quiet work and the relatives' chat hummed with that mix of polite discomfort and thinly disguised recognition that always shows up when people finally see what you have been trying to say for years, I sat down with coffee that I actually tasted instead of inhaled between apologies, opened my laptop, and decided that if I was going to end the performance of being useful while being ignored, then I was going to end it everywhere it lived, not with a tantrum or a goodbye tour, but with a set of clean decisions that would turn what they call family into something I no longer financed, managed, or absorbed, which meant starting with the places where my name had been the quiet backbone of their convenience. I called the human resources line at my job and asked to update my emergency contact information, and when the rep offered the usual script about keeping parents listed because they are quick to respond, I explained in a steady voice that quick does not equal safe, and that from now on my emergency contact would be my friend Leah, who shows up when it counts without needing a spotlight. And while the rep typed, I felt that subtle shift you only notice after too many years of tolerating nonsense. That click where your life starts to reflect your actual values instead of your old training. So I moved on to my primary care portal and revoked all prior permissions for my parents to receive updates or speak on my behalf. Removed their numbers from the pharmacy profile that had been auto-dialed for refills, updated the notification settings with my insurance so nothing with my name on it would land in their mailbox by habit. And then I set a passcode on my medical file because I have seen how quickly a person who treats you like a spare part can become very concerned with your private information when someone else is watching. From there I called the bank, the one where years ago I had let a teller talk me into listing my mother as a backup contact, just in case, and I told them to remove that authority. To put a clear note that any call from those numbers should be treated as unauthorized, and to attach a challenge phrase that only I and Leah know, which felt like changing the locks on a house I pay for but never felt welcome in. And while I had them on the line, I confirmed that my beneficiaries on every account reflected the life I actually live now, not the fantasy where parents automatically deserve what you built just because they share your blood. So I moved those designations to a combination of Leah and a small scholarship fund at the community college where I once tutored, which is the only institution that ever made me feel seen without conditions. I dug into the boring corners where we keep ties we forget we tied, the digital vaults and automatic renewals and shared plans that start out friendly and turn into obligations glued to your identity. And I closed the family cloud that I had moved off in silence the week before, exported my files, deleted the guest logins on services that had been mysteriously used at all hours of the night, canceled the household shipping profile that always defaulted to my card, and removed my address from their saved locations, which mattered more than it sounds, because my father had already hinted they would swing by to pick up that package he redirected to my place while he was off sipping something on a balcony. And instead of texting him, I printed the label marked return to sender, dropped the box at the counter without a word, and smiled when the clerk scanned it and said you are all set, because I was. I updated the settings on my phone so that their calls route to voicemail without ringing and their texts land in a folder I never check, and I made sure they were gone from location sharing because while they never let me see where they were, they loved having my dot on their map when it made logistics easier, and I removed them from the building access list with my landlord so no one could play shocked parent at the front desk and get waved upstairs for a surprise lecture. Then I sent a short, factual note to the few relatives who matter to me stating that I am not in contact with my parents, that I wish them health from a distance, and that I will not be participating in ambush reconciliation attempts. Which is the grown version of locking your diary, but also the sane version of not leaving a matchbook near a person who has always liked to watch you scramble. When the guilt tried to crawl back in with its soft little voice about duty and forgiveness and being the bigger person, I opened the spreadsheet I had made during the cruise and looked at the column of dates next to the column of phrases that all translated to not you. Not now, not important, and then I did the most satisfying, least dramatic thing I have done in a long time by drafting a single-page titled account closure that read like a final invoice for a service I no longer provide, with line items for cloud storage, streaming access, calendar management, rides, favors, last-minute favors, holiday labor, and emotional cleanup, each marked paid in full by me with a zeroed balance and a large note at the bottom that said account closed. No further transactions, which I printed, folded, and sent by certified mail to the address they love to brag about because sometimes the only language people understand is paperwork arriving with a signature required. And, just when I thought that would be the end of this phase, I realized there was one more place where the old version of me still lived, tucked into legal corners and default settings that assume parents are always the people who will do right by you. So I paused, booked a quick appointment with a notary, signed new documents that named Leah as my agent for anything that might one day matter, placed a sealed letter in my desk with instructions for the few people I trust, and walked home, feeling like I had finally taken back the keys to a life I have been paying for with interest. And as I set the last envelope down to be mailed, I looked at the small stack of tracking receipts, laughed without bitterness for the first time in a long time, and thought about the final move I had already set in motion, the one they never saw coming because it looks nothing like a fight and everything like a door that will not open when they need it most, which is exactly how this story has to end. Before I can start a better one. The days after I mailed those certified envelopes and shut every door that had once made it easy for them to treat me like a helpful ghost moved in a slow, steady line that felt almost ordinary until the moment the ordinary cracked. Because predictably and right on schedule, the calls began to stack from numbers I did not recognize, and the emails rolled in with subject lines that attempted friendliness before pivoting to urgency. And when I finally skimmed one from my father that pretended to be about a harmless update but read like a demand wrapped in a favor, I understood that the situation I had prepared for had arrived exactly as expected. Since he explained in that practical tone he uses when he wants to sound reasonable that the house refinance needed a quick signature from me, nothing complicated. Just a formality left over from that time in my 20s when he put my name on a small line of credit to help them get a better rate because my score was strong, and he promised it was just paperwork that would never touch me again, which in their language meant my signature had become a lever they assumed would always be available to pry open whatever door they wanted next. I did not reply to the email, because replying would have dragged me back into the script where I justify my boundaries until the other person feels soothed enough to continue ignoring them, so instead I opened the folder on my desktop labeled contingencies, clicked the document I had prepared weeks earlier when I first decided that I would not be the emergency plan they reached for without ever acknowledging the cost, and I printed the notarized refusal to consent along with the letter to the lender that stated clearly and without heat that no instrument bearing my name had my authorization, that any attempt to submit a signature not executed in my presence should be treated as fraudulent, and that the bank was instructed to remove me from all non-essential obligations stemming from that old arrangement. Then I walked it to the nearest overnight drop and felt the satisfying weight of a step that had been thought through long before this exact pressure arrived. While the paper traveled, the pressure tactics intensified in the ways that look polite from a distance, but feel like a squeeze when you are inside them. With my mother sending a message that layered guilt and minimalism in equal measure about how this was for the family and how Daniel needed the improved rate to help with his next move, and how I could make everything easier with one quick signature. And I sat with the truth that they had learned nothing from the screenshot except that their caption could boomerang, which is why this final move had to be structural rather than dramatic, so I logged into the credit bureaus, confirmed my freeze and my alerts, placed a remark on my files that required a phone passphrase for any application touching my name, and I sent a brief, civil email to their attorney, whose address I had from the last time they asked me to look over documents on Thanksgiving like I was a free paralegal, stating that I was not available now or in the future to execute any instrument on their behalf, and that any communication should be routed through counsel if they wished to press the issue, which is a polite way of saying the free ride is over and you will have to pay someone to hear you argue. 2 afternoons later, the lender left a voicemail that sounded almost apologetic as the representative explained that the refinance could not proceed under the current structure, that all parties with historic ties had to appear in person or be fully released, and that since my release had been requested and properly documented, they would need to restructure or seek a different product. And I will not pretend I did not feel the click of justice when I pictured the look on my father's face as he realized that the tool he had always kept in the drawer labeled daughter was gone, that there was no easy shortcut through me anymore, and that the cost of cutting me out of the fun parts of family had finally come due where it actually counted for them, which was on the deals and conveniences they value more than any conversation. The messages that followed swung from wounded to angry to bargaining, with my mother suggesting a sit-down and my father trying the old practical tone again. And I did something that would have seemed impossible to the version of me who stayed at the table long after the meal was clearly not for her. I replied with a single sentence that I had refined to its cleanest shape over weeks of thinking. A sentence that carried no heat and no apology and required no counterargument, which said that I wished them health and peace from a distance, that I would not be participating in financial, legal, or personal matters going forward, and that further messages would be archived without response. Then I placed the email in a filter that did exactly what I promised. I blocked their numbers, and I let the silence fill in behind me like a new wall that did not need to be policed, because it was built on decisions, not on moods. And because I also promised myself that my last move would not end in emptiness, but in a redefinition that felt like living rather than hiding. I invited Leah and my cousin to a simple dinner at my place on the night my parents had planned to sign their paperwork. We cooked together like people do when they like each other. We told the truth without making each other pay for it. And after we ate, I asked Leah to take a photo of us laughing over the stack of expired shared passwords I had shredded and the small pile of keys I had returned to their envelopes, not for the internet or for a performance, but for me to hold as a private reminder that family can be chosen and that boundaries can look like love when you are finally brave enough to enforce them. Though I did post one quiet note to my small circle with a caption that made me smile in a way the old caption never could. 3 words that said family, finally, and then I put my phone down, leaned back, and felt a clean peace settle in, because the plan had reached its last move. The table had turned without me raising my voice. The door had closed without slamming, and whatever story they tell about me now will have to travel without my help. Which is exactly what winning looks like when you stop begging for a seat and build your own.